Between 1970 and 1979, school cafeteria lunch ladies across America made 30 desserts from scratch every single day that defined childhood for an entire generation. These weren't store-bought snacks. They were peanut butter bars baked in industrial sheet pans, cinnamon rolls mixed and brownies frosted. Lunch ladies wore hairnets and aprons, cooking for hundreds of students using massive mixers and institutional recipes. Then federal regulations changed, processed foods took over, and homemade cafeteria desserts vanished completely from American schools. Tonight, we're remembering all 30 forgotten lunch lady desserts from the 1970s. Peanut butter bars became the most legendary lunch lady dessert in 1970s school cafeterias across America. Cafeteria workers discovered they could bake peanut butter cookie dough in massive sheet pans, spread thin chocolate frosting over the top while still warm, and cut hundreds of perfect squares that cost only pennies per serving. The bars combined thick peanut butter cookie base with glossy chocolate glaze that hardened into thin shell when cooled. This created the perfect ratio of peanut butter to chocolate that kids craved and begged their mothers to recreate at home without success. Lunch ladies mixed industrial-sized batches using enormous stand mixers and baked the bars in commercial ovens that held multiple giant pans simultaneously. This produced enough dessert to feed entire schools in single batches. Students rushed through lunch lines on peanut butter bar days, hoping to grab squares before they ran out. The recipe used cheap ingredients like peanut butter, flour, sugar, butter, and cocoa. Have you ever tasted the original cafeteria peanut butter bars? Lunch lady brownies with chocolate frosting dominated school cafeteria dessert tables throughout the 1970s, when cafeteria workers baked fudgy brownies in industrial sheet pans and covered them with hot chocolate frosting that soaked into the warm brownies. The frosting was made on the stovetop by boiling butter, milk, and cocoa together, then pouring it directly over brownies fresh from the oven. This created glossy coating that hardened into fudge-like layer as it cooled. The brownies stayed incredibly moist for hours, thanks to the frosting sealing in moisture and preventing them from drying out under heat lamps in lunch lines. Students recognized lunch lady brownies instantly by their shiny frosted tops and perfectly square shapes cut with industrial-sized knives. The recipe used cocoa powder instead of expensive baking chocolate to keep costs down, while feeding hundreds of kids daily. Lunch ladies could produce 600 brownies in 2 hours using their giant ovens and mixers. Have you ever eaten brownies with hot-poured frosting? Sticky cinnamon rolls appeared in school breakfast programs throughout the 1970s when the federal government expanded school breakfast to low-income students and cafeteria workers needed inexpensive morning treats. Lunch ladies mixed yeast dough the night before, refrigerated it overnight, then rolled it out at dawn and spread it with butter, cinnamon, and brown sugar before rolling it into logs and slicing individual rolls. The rolls baked in pans filled with butter-brown sugar mixture that bubbled up and caramelized during baking, creating sticky coating that dripped down the sides when served. Students who arrived early for breakfast got the warmest, stickiest rolls, fresh from the oven, with caramel still bubbling. The yeast dough required skill and timing that separated experienced lunch ladies from new workers who couldn't master the rising and baking schedule. The rolls cost pennies to make using bulk flour, sugar, and butter purchased through government commodity programs. Have you ever eaten cinnamon rolls for school breakfast? Cafeteria butter cookies became the signature lunch lady cookie in 1970s schools, when cafeteria workers used institutional recipes designed to produce hundreds of identical cookies from minimal ingredients. The cookies were made with shortening instead of butter to reduce costs, plus flour, sugar, eggs, and vanilla. They baked into thick, chewy rounds with crackled tops and soft centers. Lunch ladies used commercial ice cream scoops to portion dough onto massive sheet pans, ensuring every cookie was exactly the same size for fair portions. The cookies stayed soft for hours because shortening didn't harden like butter did at room temperature. Students knew these cookies by their distinctive texture and plain appearance without chocolate chips or frosting. The recipe scaled up easily, allowing lunch ladies to make 500 cookies in one morning using industrial mixers that could handle 20 pounds of dough at once. These cookies represented pure simplicity and reliability. Have you ever eaten plain butter cookies at school lunch? Chocolate chip cookies served in 1970s cafeterias were nothing like homemade versions because lunch ladies baked them in commercial ovens on industrial sheet pans that created giant flat cookies the size of saucers. The cookies spread thin during baking and turned crispy at the edges, while staying slightly chewy in the centers. They cooled into cookies so large that one cookie equaled 3 normal homemade cookies. Lunch ladies used semi-sweet chocolate chips purchased in bulk through government commodity programs. The recipe used shortening instead of butter and skipped the vanilla to save money when baking thousands of cookies monthly. Students loved the massive size and fought over cookies with the most chocolate chips visible on top. The flat shape meant they stacked easily in storage containers and fit perfectly on lunch trays without rolling off like rounded cookies would. These institutional cookies defined what chocolate chip cookies meant to an entire generation. Have you ever eaten a chocolate chip cookie bigger than your hand? 5 lunch lady desserts down, and every single one fed hundreds of students from industrial cafeteria kitchens. From peanut butter bars to giant cookies, these recipes defined school lunch throughout the 1970s. Nobody makes them anymore, but the next 5 desserts are even more forgotten. Sugar cookies appeared in school cafeterias as the most basic, reliable dessert lunch ladies could produce when budgets were tight and time was limited. The simple recipe used flour, sugar, shortening, eggs, and baking powder to create cookies that baked quickly and stayed fresh for days. Lunch ladies rolled dough thick and cut it with round cutters, producing uniform cookies that baked evenly in commercial ovens. The cookies had no frosting or decoration, just plain sugar cookie taste that some students loved while others found boring compared to chocolate or peanut butter options. The plainness meant they cost almost nothing to produce and required minimal labor from cafeteria workers already overwhelmed with cooking full meals for hundreds of students. Some lunch ladies sprinkled colored sugar on top before baking to make them more festive for holidays. The cookies were often the default dessert when nothing else was planned or when ingredient shipments were delayed. Have you ever chosen plain sugar cookies at lunch? Oatmeal cookies served in 1970s cafeterias were massive, chewy rounds packed with oats and raisins that lunch ladies baked in commercial ovens until the edges crisped and centers stayed soft. The cookies used rolled oats purchased in bulk through commodity programs, making them one of the cheapest desserts cafeterias could produce. Lunch ladies mixed huge batches that included cinnamon, nutmeg, and sometimes coconut, along with the raisins. The oats made the cookies feel healthier than chocolate desserts, which helped justify serving cookies to children during school lunch when nutrition guidelines were becoming stricter. Students either loved oatmeal cookies for their chewy texture and spice flavor, or picked out all the raisins and left the rest uneaten on their trays. The cookies stayed fresh longer than other varieties because the oats retained moisture for days. Lunch ladies could bake 400 cookies in 2 hours using industrial-sized mixers and sheet pans. Have you ever picked raisins out of cafeteria oatmeal cookies? Snickerdoodles rolled in cinnamon sugar became popular lunch lady cookies in the 1970s when cafeteria workers discovered they could make something special from basic sugar cookie dough by adding one extra step. The cookies were rolled into balls, then coated in cinnamon sugar mixture before baking. which created a sparkly, sweet exterior and distinctive flavor. The cinnamon sugar caramelized slightly during baking, forming a thin, crispy shell around soft cookie centers. Lunch ladies loved snickerdoodles because they looked fancier than plain sugar cookies, but cost the same to make and required minimal extra labor. Students recognized snickerdoodles by their crackled tops and tan color from the cinnamon coating. The name snickerdoodle generated endless jokes and questions from kids who thought it was the funniest cookie name they'd ever heard. The cookies stayed soft for days and transported well in storage containers without breaking. Apple Crisp appeared in school cafeterias throughout the 1970s as the ultimate budget dessert when lunch ladies received massive shipments of commodity apples that needed to be used quickly before spoiling. The dessert required slicing hundreds of apples, spreading them in industrial-sized pans, and topping them with streusel made from oats, flour, brown sugar, and butter. The crisp baked until the apples softened, and the topping turned golden and crunchy. Lunch ladies served it warm with a scoop that left trails of cinnamon-scented steam rising from lunch trays. The dessert was served in cafeteria bowls or directly on compartmented trays alongside the main meal. Students either loved the warm, soft apples and crunchy topping or hated the mushy fruit texture completely. Apple Crisp represented wholesome dessert that felt healthier than cookies or brownies because it contained actual fruit. The recipe scaled infinitely for feeding hundreds of students. Have you ever eaten warm Apple Crisp in a cafeteria bowl? Rice Krispie treats became a lunch lady staple in 1970s cafeterias when cafeteria workers discovered they could produce hundreds of no-bake desserts in minutes by melting marshmallows with butter and stirring in Rice Krispies cereal. The treats required no ovens, which freed up commercial ovens for cooking main meals while dessert was prepared simultaneously. Lunch ladies pressed the warm mixture into industrial sheet pans and cut it into perfect squares once cooled. The treats stayed fresh without refrigeration and could be made days in advance, which helped cafeteria workers manage tight schedules. Students loved the sweet, crunchy texture and marshmallow flavor. The treats stuck to teeth and required milk to wash them down, which helped the school lunch program meet dairy requirements. The recipe was foolproof even for inexperienced cafeteria workers, making it reliable dessert when time was short and staff was limited. Have you ever gotten Rice Krispie treats stuck in your teeth at school lunch? 10 lunch lady desserts complete, and every single one fed hundreds of students from massive cafeteria kitchens across America. From giant cookies to warm crisps, these recipes defined 1970s school lunch culture. Nobody serves them anymore, but the next 10 desserts are even more nostalgic and forgotten. Sweet treats earned their simple name in 1970s school cafeterias when lunch ladies created two-layer bars featuring peanut butter cookie base topped with chocolate layer that students devoured faster than any other dessert on the menu. The bottom layer was dense peanut butter cookie dough pressed into giant sheet pans and baked until just set. While still hot, lunch ladies spread melted chocolate mixed with more peanut butter across the top, creating glossy coating that hardened as it cooled into fudge-like finish. The bars were cut into small squares because they were so rich and sweet that larger portions would have been overwhelming. Students called them sweet treats, peanut butter dreams, or chocolate squares depending on which school district served them. The name sweet treats appeared on cafeteria menus printed on ditto machines that left purple ink on students' fingers when they touched the paper. Lunch ladies could produce 800 bars in 2 hours using commercial mixers and ovens. The bars transported perfectly, without breaking or melting, making them ideal for cafeteria service, where desserts sat under heat lamps for extended periods. The recipe used commodity peanut butter from government surplus programs, which meant the flavor varied slightly depending on which brand the USDA shipped that month. Some batches were saltier, while others tasted sweeter, creating inconsistency that students noticed but didn't complain about because any version was delicious. Jell-O cups appeared on every school lunch tray throughout the 1970s, in small paper cups with peel-back foil lids that students struggled to open without spilling. Lunch ladies made industrial quantities of Jell-O by dissolving boxes of gelatin powder in boiling water, adding cold water, then pouring the liquid into hundreds of individual portion cups that filled entire refrigerator shelves. The Jell-O set overnight in walk-in coolers, ready for the next day's lunch service. Red and orange were the most common flavors because they were cheapest and most popular, with students who rejected lime green and lemon yellow Jell-O as weird and unappetizing. The paper cups leaked sometimes, creating sticky puddles on lunch trays that mixed with other foods and created complaints from students who hated when their Jell-O touched their main course. Lunch ladies tried different cup brands to find ones that didn't leak, but the problem persisted because the cups were flimsy and easily punctured. Some cafeterias switched to small plastic containers with snap-on lids that cost more but eliminated the leaking problem completely. Students peeled the foil lids carefully to avoid ripping them and spilling Jell-O everywhere. Some kids ate the Jell-O by licking it directly from the cup, while others used spoons from their silverware sets. The wobbly texture fascinated children who poked it with fingers and watched it jiggle before eating. Jell-O provided fruit-flavored sweetness and bright color that made lunch trays look more appealing even when the main course was unappetizing mystery meat. The cups fulfilled federal nutrition requirements because Jell-O counted as a fruit serving in the USDA school lunch guidelines, even though it contained zero actual fruit and was primarily sugar and gelatin. Lunch ladies justified serving it by claiming students needed something sweet to encourage eating lunch. Have you ever struggled to open those foil lids without spilling? Hunt's Snack Pack pudding arrived in school cafeterias in the 1970s in distinctive metal cans with pull-tab lids that students yanked open to reveal thick chocolate or vanilla pudding inside. The cans were revolutionary because they required no refrigeration until opened, which meant lunch ladies could store cases of pudding at room temperature and grab them as needed for lunch service. This eliminated the need to make pudding from scratch and freed up time for preparing main courses. The metal cans made satisfying popping sounds when opened, and the pull tabs often broke off in students' hands, requiring butter knives to pry the lids open completely. Chocolate was overwhelmingly more popular than vanilla, butterscotch, or tapioca flavors that Hunt's also manufactured. Students traded their vanilla puddings for chocolate ones, or simply threw away flavors they didn't like, creating waste that frustrated cafeteria workers trying to manage food costs. The pudding was thick and almost fudge-like in texture, far denser than homemade pudding made with milk. Some students ate it slowly with spoons, while others squeezed the flexible metal cans to push pudding directly into their mouths. The cans were small, holding only 4 ounces of pudding that disappeared in 4 or 5 bites for hungry students who wanted larger portions. Lunch ladies had no control over portion sizes because the cans were pre-packaged, unlike homemade desserts that could be served in any quantity. The individual packaging created massive amounts of trash as hundreds of metal cans were thrown away daily. The pudding fulfilled dessert requirements cheaply and reliably without requiring any preparation beyond opening cases and placing cans on lunch trays. Lunch ladies appreciated the convenience even though homemade pudding tasted better and cost less per serving when made in bulk quantities. Have you ever cut your finger on those sharp pull-tab lids? Peanut butter cookies served in 1970s cafeterias were massive rounds pressed with fork tines to create the distinctive crosshatch pattern on top that identified them instantly as peanut butter cookies. Lunch ladies mixed industrial batches using commodity peanut butter, shortening, flour, sugar, and eggs, then scooped dough onto sheet pans using ice cream scoops that ensured uniform sizing. Before baking, they pressed each cookie twice with forks to flatten them and create the traditional crisscross marks. The cookies baked until the edges browned and the centers set into dense, chewy texture. The cookies were substantially larger than homemade versions, often measuring 4 inches across and weighing several ounces each. Students with peanut allergies had to avoid them completely, though peanut allergies were far less common in the 1970s than they became in later decades. The cookies contained no chocolate chips or other additions, just pure peanut butter flavor that was either loved intensely or disliked completely, with no middle ground. Lunch ladies made these cookies when peanut butter shipments arrived from government commodity programs. The USDA provided surplus peanut butter to schools in giant industrial-sized containers that needed to be used in various menu items throughout the month. Peanut butter cookies, along with peanut butter bars and peanut butter sandwiches, helped cafeterias use up the allocation before it expired. The cookies stayed fresh for several days when stored in airtight containers, which meant lunch ladies could bake large batches once or twice weekly rather than baking fresh cookies daily. This efficiency helped them manage time when cooking for hundreds of students with limited staff. The cookies were filling and high in protein, which helped students stay energized through afternoon classes. Have you ever pressed fork marks into cookie dough before baking? Frosted sugar cookies appeared in school cafeterias during holidays, when lunch ladies decorated plain sugar cookies with colored frosting and sprinkles to celebrate Valentine's Day, Halloween, Christmas, and Easter. The cookies were cut into shapes using industrial-sized metal cookie cutters shaped like hearts, pumpkins, trees, and eggs. Lunch ladies baked hundreds of cookies, then mixed powdered sugar frosting tinted with food coloring in red, orange, green, or pastel colors, depending on the holiday. The frosting was spread thick on cooled cookies and topped with colored sprinkles before it hardened. Students anticipated holiday cookies for weeks and judged cafeteria workers on how well the cookies were decorated. Some lunch ladies took pride in creating beautiful cookies with perfectly smooth frosting and generous sprinkles, while others rushed through decorating and produced sloppy cookies with uneven frosting and sparse sprinkles. The best lunch ladies let cookies dry completely before stacking them, preventing frosting from smearing and colors from bleeding together. The cookies were more expensive and time-consuming to produce than plain cookies because they required extra ingredients, labor, and drying time. This meant they appeared only for major holidays rather than weekly like other desserts. Students who were absent on cookie days felt cheated and complained loudly about missing the special treats. The frosting was made with powdered sugar, butter, milk, and vanilla mixed until smooth and spreadable. Food coloring bottles were shaken vigorously before adding drops to achieve the desired intensity. Too much coloring made the frosting taste bitter and stained students' mouths and teeth bright colors that lasted hours. Parents complained when children came home with blue or green tongues from licking frosting off cookies. The cookies represented the only decorative, festive desserts lunch ladies produced all year. Regular weekday desserts were plain and functional, but holiday cookies showed creativity and celebration. Have you ever gotten your tongue stained from frosted cookies? Lemon bars brought bright citrus flavor to school cafeterias in the 1970s when lunch ladies baked shortbread crusts in giant sheet pans, poured lemon custard filling over the top, and baked everything together until the filling set firm. The bars required fresh lemon juice squeezed from real lemons rather than bottled juice, which meant cafeteria workers spent time cutting and squeezing dozens of lemons to get enough juice for institutional-sized batches. The crust was pressed firmly into pans before baking to create sturdy foundation that wouldn't crumble when cut into squares. The lemon filling was made by whisking eggs, sugar, flour, and lemon juice together until smooth, then pouring it over the partially baked crust. The bars baked until the filling no longer jiggled when shaken, then cooled completely before being dusted heavily with powdered sugar. Lunch ladies used fine mesh sieves to sprinkle powdered sugar evenly across the entire pan, creating white coating that looked elegant and professional. Students either loved the tart lemon flavor or found it too sour and refused to eat them. The tartness made these bars less popular than chocolate or peanut butter desserts that students preferred overwhelmingly. Lunch ladies made lemon bars less frequently than other desserts because they were labor-intensive and not universally loved. The powdered sugar coating got everywhere, falling off the bars onto lunch trays, tables, and students' clothing. Children with dark shirts ended up covered in white powder that looked like they'd been in snowball fights. The mess frustrated teachers, who sent students back from lunch covered in sugar dust. The bars needed refrigeration after cutting, which created storage challenges in cafeterias with limited refrigerator space already filled with milk, produce, and other perishables. Some lunch ladies served them slightly warm, which made the filling softer and less firm than properly chilled bars should be. Have you ever gotten powdered sugar all over your dark clothes? Peach cobbler appeared in school cafeterias when lunch ladies received shipments of canned peaches from government commodity programs and needed to use them quickly before expiration dates passed. The dessert consisted of sweetened peaches spread in industrial pans and topped with cake-like batter that baked into golden crust. Lunch ladies opened dozens of large institutional-sized cans of peaches, drained some of the syrup, and spread the fruit evenly in pans before spooning batter over the top. The batter was a simple mixture of flour, sugar, butter, milk, and baking powder that spread easily over fruit. During baking, the batter rose and formed crusty top, while the peaches bubbled underneath, creating the characteristic cobbler texture. The dessert was served warm in cafeteria bowls with the peach juices pooling at the bottom. Some lunch ladies added cinnamon to the peaches before covering them with batter, creating spiced version that tasted more complex. Students loved cobbler because it was served warm and felt special, compared to cold cookies or bars. The fruit content made it seem healthier than pure sugar desserts, which satisfied administrators concerned about nutrition. Lunch ladies could make enough cobbler to feed 500 students using 6 industrial pans baked simultaneously in commercial ovens. The cobbler stayed warm under heat lamps in lunch lines for over an hour, without drying out or becoming unappetizing. The moist fruit kept the batter from hardening even when held at serving temperature for extended periods. Some students ate only the crust and left the peaches untouched, while others ate the fruit and ignored the topping completely. The dessert created minimal cleanup because it was served directly from baking pans rather than being individually plated. Lunch ladies scraped empty pans and soaked them immediately to prevent dried peach syrup from hardening into difficult-to-remove residue. Have you ever eaten only the crust and left the fruit? Flying saucer cookies earned their space-age name in 1970s cafeterias from their round, flat shape and the combination of oatmeal, cornflakes, and coconut that created unusual texture unlike any other cookie students had tasted before. Lunch ladies mixed oats and crushed cornflakes with coconut, flour, sugar, butter, and vanilla to create dough that was pressed flat and baked until golden. The cookies spread during baking into thin, crispy rounds with slightly chewy centers from the oats and coconut. The cornflakes added unexpected crunch that surprised students biting into what looked like regular oatmeal cookies. The coconut provided subtle sweetness and tropical flavor that distinguished these from plain oatmeal varieties. Lunch ladies crushed cornflakes in large plastic bags, using rolling pins or their hands, before adding them to the dough, creating texture that ranged from coarse crumbs to fine powder, depending on how much crushing happened. Students loved the name Flying Saucer Cookies because it sounded futuristic and exciting during an era when space exploration dominated news and popular culture. The cookies appeared on cafeteria menus with their official name, which generated conversation and jokes about eating spaceships for dessert. Some schools called them different names like space cookies or UFO cookies, but the concept remained the same. The cookies stayed crispy for days when stored properly in airtight containers, making them practical for cafeteria service where desserts needed long shelf life. Lunch ladies appreciated recipes that could be made in advance rather than requiring daily fresh baking. The multiple textures from oats, cornflakes, and coconut created interesting eating experience that kept students engaged rather than bored with repetitive desserts. The recipe used commodity ingredients available through government surplus programs, keeping costs minimal while providing substantial cookies that filled students up and kept them satisfied through afternoon classes. Have you ever eaten cookies that tasted like breakfast cereal? Monster cookies became legendary in 1970s school cafeterias for their massive size, colorful M&M candies, and the fact that they contained no flour at all, just oats, peanut butter, eggs, sugar, and chocolate candies. Lunch ladies mixed enormous batches using industrial mixers that could handle the thick, sticky dough that was almost impossible to stir by hand. The cookies were scooped onto sheet pans using large ice cream scoops that created portions weighing several ounces each. They baked into cookies so large that one cookie filled students up completely. The M&M candies provided bright pops of color throughout the brown cookies, making them visually appealing and fun to eat. Students counted how many M&Ms were in their cookies and compared numbers with friends to see who got the most candies. The oats and peanut butter created dense, chewy texture that was substantially different from traditional flour-based cookies. The cookies were filling because they contained so much peanut butter and oats, both of which provided protein and fiber that kept students satisfied. The name Monster Cookies came from their enormous size rather than any connection to actual monsters. Students joked about needing monster appetites to finish entire cookies. Some lunch ladies made the cookies even larger for special occasions, creating portions that weighed half a pound each and required 2 hands to hold. The flourless recipe meant students with wheat allergies could eat these cookies safely, though peanut allergies prevented some kids from enjoying them. The cookies stayed fresh for over a week when stored properly, improving in texture as they aged and became chewier. Lunch ladies wrapped leftover cookies individually in plastic wrap and froze them for future lunch service. The cookies represented peak indulgence in cafeteria desserts because they combined multiple favorite flavors and textures into single massive portion that felt like getting 3 desserts at once. Have you ever needed 2 hands to hold one cookie? Pumpkin bars appeared in school cafeterias every autumn when lunch ladies needed seasonal desserts to celebrate fall and Halloween. The bars were made with canned pumpkin puree mixed into spiced cake batter that baked in sheet pans until set, then cooled and frosted with thick cream cheese frosting. The pumpkin created incredibly moist texture and subtle flavor enhanced by cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, and cloves that filled cafeterias with autumn fragrance during baking. Lunch ladies opened institutional-sized cans of pumpkin, containing several pounds of puree that went into multiple batches of bars. The pumpkin turned the batter bright orange, creating distinctive color that signaled fall desserts. The bars were cut into perfect squares after frosting set firm, creating neat portions that served easily on lunch trays. The cream cheese frosting was essential because it balanced the spices and added tangy richness that plain pumpkin cake lacked. Students who loved pumpkin pie enjoyed these bars immensely, while kids who hated pumpkin refused to touch them regardless of how good they smelled. The bars generated strong opinions with no middle ground. Some cafeterias served them only in October and November, making them special seasonal treats rather than year-round options. The frosting was made with cream cheese, butter, powdered sugar, and vanilla beaten until smooth and spreadable. Lunch ladies spread it thick across cooled bars using offset spatulas that created smooth, professional-looking finish. The frosting hardened slightly as it set, creating firm coating that didn't smear when bars were handled. The bars stayed fresh for several days when refrigerated, though cafeterias with limited refrigerator space sometimes stored them at room temperature and served them within 24 hours before the frosting could spoil. Have you ever refused to eat pumpkin bars because you hated pumpkin? 20 lunch lady desserts complete, and everyone represented cafeteria workers' skill at feeding hundreds of students daily from industrial kitchens. From flying saucer cookies to monster-sized treats, these defined childhood lunch memories. Nobody makes them anymore. The final 10 are the most forgotten of all. Butterscotch cookies brought warm caramel flavor to school cafeterias in the 1970s, when lunch ladies mixed butterscotch chips into simple sugar cookie dough to create sweet, golden cookies that students either loved obsessively or completely ignored in favor of chocolate options. The butterscotch chips melted slightly during baking, creating pockets of caramel throughout the cookies that stayed soft and chewy even after cooling. Lunch ladies purchased butterscotch chips in bulk through commodity programs at a fraction of the cost of chocolate chips, which made these cookies economical alternatives when chocolate supplies ran low or budgets became tight. The cookies baked into pale golden rounds that looked plain and unexciting compared to chocolate chip cookies, which hurt their popularity among students who judged desserts by appearance before tasting. The butterscotch flavor was subtle and sophisticated, appealing more to adults than to children who preferred intense chocolate or peanut butter tastes. Some students had never tasted butterscotch before encountering these cookies at school lunch, leading to confusion about whether they were eating caramel cookies, vanilla cookies, or something entirely different. Lunch ladies mixed industrial batches, using the same basic recipe as sugar cookies, but added butterscotch chips at the end to avoid crushing them during mixing. The chips distributed unevenly throughout the dough, meaning some cookies contained many chips, while others had only a few, creating inequality that students noticed and complained about. The cookies were scooped onto sheet pans and baked until the edges turned golden brown, while the centers stayed soft and pale. Butterscotch cookies appeared less frequently than chocolate chip or oatmeal varieties because they were less popular and generated more complaints from students who wanted familiar flavors rather than unusual alternatives. Some cafeterias abandoned them entirely after serving them once and receiving overwhelmingly negative feedback. Other schools served them monthly to students who specifically requested them and appreciated the different flavor profile. The cookies represented lunch ladies' attempts to provide variety in dessert options rather than serving the same 5 desserts repeatedly throughout the school year, though variety sometimes backfired when students rejected anything unfamiliar or different from their expectations. Have you ever confused butterscotch with caramel flavor? Magic cookie bars earned their magical name in 1970s cafeterias, when lunch ladies discovered they could layer 7 different ingredients in sheet pans without mixing anything together, bake them for 30 minutes, and produce dessert bars that sliced into perfect squares containing graham cracker crust, sweetened condensed milk, chocolate chips, butterscotch chips, coconut, and chopped nuts, all held together mysteriously. The bars were also called 7-layer bars, or Hello Dolly bars, depending on which region of the country served them, though the recipe remained identical regardless of the name. Lunch ladies started by crushing graham crackers and mixing the crumbs with melted butter to create press-in crust that lined the bottom of industrial pans. The crust baked briefly before being removed from ovens and topped with layers of chocolate chips, butterscotch chips, shredded coconut, and chopped pecans or walnuts, depending on which nuts were available through commodity programs. The final layer was sweetened condensed milk poured evenly over everything, seeping down through the layers and binding them together during baking. The bars baked until the condensed milk caramelized slightly, and the coconut turned golden brown on top, creating sweet, sticky dessert with multiple textures and flavors in every bite. Students loved the variety within single bars, getting crunchy nuts, chewy coconut, melted chocolate, and butterscotch all at once. The bars were incredibly sweet because the condensed milk contained massive amounts of sugar, making them almost candy-like rather than traditional cookie bars. Lunch ladies could produce hundreds of bars quickly because the recipe required no mixing and minimal preparation beyond opening cans and packages and layering ingredients in pans. The bars needed to cool completely before cutting, or they fell apart into messy piles of loose ingredients rather than neat squares. Properly cooled bars sliced cleanly and held together when lifted from pans and placed on lunch trays. The bars stayed fresh for over a week when wrapped tightly, though the coconut sometimes became soggy if stored too long. The condensed milk created sticky texture that made the bars difficult to eat neatly, leaving residue on fingers and faces that required napkins and hand washing after lunch. Have you ever counted all 7 layers in one bar? Cafeteria toffee bars combined buttery shortbread crust with chocolate topping and crushed toffee pieces to create sophisticated dessert that seemed too fancy for school lunch, but appeared occasionally when lunch ladies wanted to impress students and administrators with their baking skills. The bars started with rich shortbread dough pressed into sheet pans and baked until golden and crispy, creating sturdy foundation that could support heavy toppings without becoming soggy. The shortbread used real butter rather than shortening, which made these bars more expensive than most cafeteria desserts, but also substantially more delicious. While the shortbread was still hot from the oven, lunch ladies spread melted chocolate across the surface and sprinkled crushed toffee candy pieces over the wet chocolate so they stuck firmly as the chocolate hardened. The toffee pieces added crunch and caramel flavor that elevated these bars beyond simple chocolate-topped cookies into something special and memorable. Some lunch ladies used Heath bars purchased in bulk and crushed with hammers, while others made their own toffee by cooking sugar and butter to hard crack stage and breaking the cooled candy into chunks. The bars needed to cool completely before cutting, or the chocolate topping would smear and the toffee pieces would scatter everywhere, creating messy disaster rather than neat bars. Lunch ladies scored the chocolate with knives while it was still slightly soft to mark cutting lines, then finished cutting after everything hardened completely. The bars were cut smaller than typical cafeteria desserts because they were so rich and buttery that large portions would have been overwhelming. The bars transported poorly because the chocolate topping melted in warm temperatures, and the toffee pieces sometimes fell off during handling, creating storage and service challenges for cafeteria workers. Some lunch ladies refrigerated the bars to keep the chocolate firm, which created different problem because cold shortbread became rock hard and difficult to bite through. The bars were best served at room temperature when the shortbread was tender and the chocolate was firm but not brittle. The recipe was labor-intensive compared to simple drop cookies, requiring multiple steps and careful timing to execute properly. This meant only the most skilled and dedicated lunch ladies attempted these bars, while less experienced workers stuck to easier recipes that were more forgiving of mistakes. Have you ever crushed toffee candy with a hammer? Date bars appeared in 1970s cafeterias when lunch ladies needed to use up commodity dates that arrived in large boxes from government surplus programs and sat in dry storage waiting to be incorporated into menu items. The bars consisted of oat crumble layers, sandwiching thick date filling made by cooking chopped dates with sugar, water, and lemon juice until the mixture became paste-like and spreadable. Lunch ladies spent hours chopping sticky dates by hand using kitchen shears or sharp knives, creating tedious labor that made these bars time-consuming and unpopular among cafeteria workers, even though students who liked dates enjoyed them. The bottom layer was oat-based crumble made from oats, flour, brown sugar, and butter pressed firmly into sheet pans and partially baked before the date filling was spread on top. The remaining crumble was sprinkled over the filling, creating top layer that baked golden brown and crispy. The finished bars had distinctive layered appearance, with dark date filling visible between pale crumble layers when sliced into squares. Lunch ladies made date bars infrequently because they required extensive preparation time and generated complaints from students who refused to eat them. The bars appeared most often when commodity date shipments were large and needed to be used before expiration, forcing cafeterias to incorporate dates into menu items whether students wanted them or not. The bars fulfilled federal nutrition requirements because dates counted as fruit servings, which helped cafeterias meet USDA guidelines even when students threw the bars away uneaten. Date bars represented the disconnect between government commodity programs that provided surplus foods and student preferences that rejected unfamiliar ingredients regardless of nutritional value or cost savings. Have you ever picked off the crumble and thrown away the dates? Coconut macaroons appeared in school cafeterias as chewy, sweet mounds of shredded coconut held together with sweetened condensed milk and egg whites that baked into golden peaks with crispy exteriors and soft, moist centers. Lunch ladies mixed massive quantities of sweetened coconut with condensed milk and beaten egg whites, then scooped the mixture onto parchment-lined sheet pans using ice cream scoops to create uniform portions. The macaroons baked until the coconut turned golden brown on the edges while staying white and tender in the centers, creating textural contrast that made them interesting to eat. The macaroons were simple to make because they required only 3 or 4 ingredients and minimal mixing, which appealed to lunch ladies working under time pressure to produce desserts for hundreds of students daily. The recipe scaled easily, allowing cafeterias to make 50 or 500 macaroons using the same basic proportions and techniques. The macaroons cooled quickly and could be served within an hour of baking, making them practical for same-day production rather than requiring overnight preparation. Students either loved coconut macaroons intensely or hated coconut completely, with passionate intensity that made these polarizing desserts. Children who enjoyed coconut requested macaroons repeatedly. Have you ever picked coconut shreds out of your teeth all afternoon? 25 lunch lady desserts down, and every single one represented institutional cooking that fed hundreds of students from massive cafeteria kitchens daily. From toffee bars to coconut macaroons, these recipes defined 1970s school lunch culture completely. The final 5 desserts are the most labor-intensive and forgotten. Peanut butter fudge squares combined fudge-like peanut butter layer with chocolate topping to create intensely rich dessert that lunch ladies served in tiny portions because larger pieces would have been too sweet and heavy for students to finish during short lunch periods. The base was made by cooking peanut butter, and powdered sugar together until smooth and spreadable, then pressing the mixture into sheet pans while still warm and pliable. The mixture set as it cooled into firm, fudge-like texture that sliced cleanly when cut with sharp knives. The chocolate topping was melted chocolate chips mixed with more peanut butter and spread across the cooled base layer, creating glossy finish that hardened into thin shell as it set. The combination created peanut butter cup flavor in bar form, which students recognized immediately and compared to Reese's candy that they bought at stores. The squares were cut small, usually 1-inch portions rather than the 2-inch squares typical of other cafeteria bars, because the richness and sweetness were overwhelming in larger amounts. Lunch ladies made these squares when commodity peanut butter shipments were abundant and needed to be used in desserts rather than just sandwiches and cookies. The squares required no baking, which freed up commercial ovens for cooking main lunch courses while desserts were prepared simultaneously. The no-bake preparation meant even inexperienced cafeteria workers could make these successfully without risk of burning or underbaking that plagued more complicated recipes. The recipe was expensive compared to simple cookies because it required large quantities of peanut butter, chocolate chips, and powdered sugar, rather than basic flour-based ingredients. This meant cafeterias served them infrequently. Have you ever tried to trade your whole lunch for extra fudge squares? Cafeteria cinnamon bars consisted of dense, cake-like base swirled with cinnamon sugar mixture that created marbled appearance when baked and sliced into squares for serving. Lunch ladies made simple yellow cake batter and spread half of it in sheet pans, sprinkled cinnamon sugar mixture across the batter, added the remaining batter on top, then swirled everything together with knives or spatulas to create distinctive pattern. The bars baked until set and golden, filling cafeterias with cinnamon fragrance that made students hungry before they even entered lunch lines. The cinnamon swirl created pockets of intense cinnamon flavor throughout the bars rather than uniform distribution, meaning each bite tasted slightly different depending on whether it contained more or less cinnamon. Students who loved cinnamon sought out squares with visible dark swirls, while kids who disliked strong cinnamon flavor chose squares with minimal swirling and milder taste. The bars were served plain without frosting, though some lunch ladies dusted them with powdered sugar after cooling to add sweetness and make them look more finished. The bars were simple to make and required no special techniques beyond basic cake mixing and the swirling step that created the signature appearance. Lunch ladies could produce hundreds of bars quickly using commercial mixers and ovens, making them practical for regular rotation in cafeteria dessert menus. The bars stayed fresh for several days when wrapped properly, improving in texture as they aged and became more moist and tender. Students generally liked cinnamon bars because they tasted familiar and comforting. Cherry Crisp appeared in school cafeterias when lunch ladies received commodity shipments of canned cherries that needed to be used in desserts before expiration dates passed. The crisp consisted of sweet cherries spread in industrial pans and topped with crumbly oat streusel that baked golden and crunchy, while the cherries bubbled underneath and released their bright red juices. Lunch ladies opened dozens of large institutional cans of cherries, drained some of the heavy syrup, and spread the fruit evenly in pans before covering with streusel topping made from oats, flour, brown sugar, butter, and cinnamon. The crisp baked until the topping turned deep golden brown, and the cherry filling bubbled at the edges, creating dessert that was served warm in cafeteria bowls or directly on compartmented lunch trays. The warm cherries stained everything they touched bright red, creating colorful messes on trays, tables, and students' clothing that frustrated cafeteria workers and custodians who dealt with cleanup. Students learned to eat cherry crisp carefully to avoid splattering the bright red juice that permanently stained white shirts and light-colored clothing. The cherries were either sweet or tart, depending on which variety the USDA shipped that month, creating inconsistency that confused students who expected the same flavor every time. Sweet cherries were universally popular, while tart cherries generated complaints from kids who found them too sour and acidic. Lunch ladies sometimes added extra sugar to tart cherry batches to compensate, though this didn't completely eliminate the sour flavor that some students hated. The oat topping provided crunchy texture that contrasted beautifully with soft, syrupy cherries, making the crisp texturally interesting and satisfying. Students who disliked fruit sometimes ate only the topping and left the cherries untouched, wasting the most expensive ingredient. The crisp stayed warm under heat lamps in lunch lines for extended periods, without drying out, because the cherry juices kept everything moist. Cherry crisp represented seasonal dessert that appeared most frequently in late spring and early summer, when fresh cherries were harvested and canned versions became available through commodity programs. The bright red color and warm fruit made the crisp seem festive and special compared to plain cookies or brownies served year-round. The dessert required serving utensils rather than being finger food, which created extra dishes to wash and slowed down lunch service when students had to scoop their own portions rather than grabbing pre-portioned items. The bowls or tray compartments needed scraping to remove sticky cherry residue that hardened if left too long. Have you ever stained your shirt bright red with cherry juice? Scotcheroos became iconic lunch lady dessert in 1970s cafeterias when the recipe appeared on Rice Krispies cereal boxes and cafeteria workers discovered they could produce hundreds of no-bake bars, quickly using commodity peanut butter, corn syrup, sugar, Rice Krispies cereal, and chocolate butterscotch chip topping. Lunch ladies cooked corn syrup and sugar together until bubbling, stirred in peanut butter until melted and smooth, then mixed in Rice Krispies cereal to coat every piece. The mixture was pressed into sheet pans while still warm and pliable, creating compact base layer that set firm as it cooled. The topping was made by melting chocolate chips and butterscotch chips together until smooth and glossy, then spreading the mixture across the cereal base before it hardened. The chocolate-butterscotch combination created distinctive flavor that students recognized immediately as different from plain Rice Krispie treats or peanut butter bars. The topping hardened as it cooled, creating thin, candy-like shell over the crunchy cereal layer. Students loved Scotcheroos because they combined multiple favorite flavors and textures into single dessert bar. The peanut butter provided salty richness that balanced the sweet chocolate and butterscotch topping. The Rice Krispies added satisfying crunch that made the bars fun to eat and created pleasant sound when bitten. The bars were substantial and filling, helping students feel satisfied after lunch without needing additional snacks. Lunch ladies appreciated Scotcheroos because they required no baking and could be prepared quickly between other cafeteria duties. Oatmeal cream pies consisted of 2 soft oatmeal cookies sandwiched around sweet vanilla cream filling to create dessert that mimicked the Little Debbie snack cakes students bought at stores, but was made from scratch by lunch ladies using institutional recipes. The cookies were made with oats, flour, brown sugar, butter, eggs, cinnamon, and sometimes raisins, baked until just set, so they stayed soft and chewy rather than crispy. Lunch ladies scooped uniform portions onto sheet pans to ensure the cookies were identical sizes that would pair properly when sandwiched together. The cream filling was made by beating shortening, powdered sugar, marshmallow creme, and vanilla until light and fluffy, creating sweet frosting-like mixture that was spreadable but firm enough to stay in place between cookies without squishing out the sides. Lunch ladies spread filling on the flat side of one cookie and pressed another cookie on top. These 30 forgotten lunch lady desserts once filled school cafeterias with homemade sweetness, each made from scratch by cafeteria workers who cooked for hundreds of students daily. From peanut butter bars to oatmeal cream pies, they represented an era when lunch ladies baked everything in industrial kitchens using massive mixers and commercial ovens. Today, these recipes have disappeared completely, replaced by pre-packaged snacks and processed foods shipped in boxes. If you ate lunch lady desserts in the 1970s, share this video before these memories fade forever. Subscribe now for more forgotten cafeteria history.